a more effective evil. A more effective evil that we, the voters, are responsible for putting in power. So the first thing I'd like to explore with you as I ruminate aloud is the idea that arsonists are at work all over our world. I find it interesting that we have been called together at a time when the world is literally on fire. And the arsonists who are setting these fires are still not happy. They want every corner of the world to be aglow, either with nuclear radiation of one sort or another, a la Fukushima, or as a result of what this president calls high or low kinetic activity that includes the use of depleted uranium munitions, or with this human species being alit with hatred. Institutions in the U.S. have trained everyone since the beginning of this country to be especially afraid of black males. And with that now so permanently seared into the psyches of blacks, whites, and all newcomers to the U.S., it was time to move on to the next group to hate, Latinos, from what Hugo Chavez called Nuestra America, our America, where the straightness and the thickness of the hair reveal too much indigenous heritage, or the darkness of the skin, or the roundness of the lips, or the frizziness of the hair reveal too much African heritage. Latinos from Nuestra America leave their family, homes, communities, and countries because U.S. foreign policy has made life unbearable there. They come to the U.S. and are abused for their labor, and our programmed hatred of them makes it easier for us to support policies that abuse and mistreat them. Today, the U.S. is supposedly negotiating with Hondurans a way to deal with the influx of underage asylum seekers arriving on the U.S. border with Mexico. But just imagine if the United States had not interfered with 2 Honduran elections, regime changing the presidency of Manuel Zelaya when he dared to support land reform and the new constitution for all the Honduran people, and then the U.S. interfered in Honduras' most recent 2013 presidential election, preventing the election of Zelaya's wife, Xiomara Castro. Without that foreign policy of the U.S., President Obama's first coup after he came to office, Hondurans would be building their nation instead of fleeing it.
That's right. Yes.
If truth is the first casualty of war, then it could also be said that hatred is one of the spoils of war. Not satisfied with lighting the fire of hatred of blacks and the indigenous and Nuestra America Latinos, in the last decade or so, we have been told that Muslims are worthy of our hatred. So, many of the new generation of young people in the U.S. believe that Muslims want to kill us or kill them because Muslims hate our freedoms. And so we had better kill them before they kill us. But interestingly, while we are taught to hate Muslims, from what I've seen of the arsonists' successful work, Muslims are doing a pretty good job of killing each other. But we are supposed to hate and fear them. Now, not even satisfied with the carnage thus produced, Colombia is on fire, Venezuela is on fire, Syria is on fire, North Africa is on fire, West Asia is on fire. The arsonists have added China and Russia to the menu and have set Eurasia afire with their path to these countries. For the moment, that is Ukraine. But for the arsonists, Iran and Turkey are mere stepping stones towards setting Russia and China afire. And they're already firing up the kindling inside these countries. That includes the Chechens for the Russians and the Uyghurs for the Chinese. So today, in a highly calculated move to overthrow the government of Ukraine and set the wheels in motion, the chariots of fire have begun their roll through Asia. It just dawns on me to ask, is this what our president meant when he announced the U.S. policy as a pivot to Asia? Interestingly, we have been called together to this beautiful hamlet tucked away in the heart of the Cherokee Nation. A plateau where two Cherokee trails cross is now the town of Asheville. And even as we gather in this idyllic setting, the arsonists are still at work. While here, it might even be easy to forget what's happening in the rest of the world. But I can't. Because I know that what is wrought abroad comes home. And what is made at home is exported abroad. And I have evidence for what I say. Medea was with me in Georgia when the pro-Israel lobby struck me the first time. We have waged a valiant struggle, and Medea and all of you who were there with me at this very difficult time, I want to say thank you to you now. I've been quoted as saying that the moment I refused the AIPAC Pledge of Loyalty to Israel as a candidate in 1992, I became engaged in hand-to-hand combat, and staying in Congress was trench warfare. But sadly, very few people even understood or cared what I was going through, because as other victims, I was made to appear in public as if I deserved what I got. Media demonization is purposeful in that it leads the public to believe that the demonized person deserved what they got. I can point to the example of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose murder I have studied extensively, both as a congressperson and as a PhD student. According to Sheldon Appleton's research, nearly 1/3 of respondents to a poll taken after the murder of Dr. King felt strongest that Dr. King had brought his assassination on himself. That's why whole countries are now personified in the media by the likeness of one individual whom we are actually being directed to hate. So 7 million people in Libya are reduced to Muammar Gaddafi. 143 million Russians are reduced to Vladimir Putin. 1.4 billion Chinese will be reduced to Xi Jinping if he stands up for the Chinese people and their national interests and fights foreign domination. It works that way whether the arsonists are lighting the kindling underneath a foreign leader or a domestic one. Not only have I been through this firsthand and have my own personal experiences and can watch and understand what is happening when this template is being applied in other situations to other leaders, but I now understand the mechanisms of oppression and repression, because Antioch University has allowed me to study this particular phenomenon as a part of my PhD studies. So that's where I want to go next in this moment of what I hope is a mutual sharing. What we struggle against are the tactics and orchestrations that prevent us from experiencing peace at home as well as peace abroad. Your theme for this 2014 convention is peace at home, peace abroad. One thing we should know by now is that the arsonists will prevent peace abroad by lighting up, for example, Congo in the 1960s with regime change that brings about untold suffering on the African continent, and then will spark fire again by executing regime change in the 1990s in Rwanda, Burundi, and then Congo again, that brings about even more suffering in Africa. From these two examples in Africa, we now know that the United States will have targeted assassination as a policy and will lie about it for as long as it can get away with the lie. In December of 2013, the United States finally admitted that President Eisenhower authorized the murder of Patrice Lumumba and set aside dollars for the deed to be carried out. On my Facebook page, I asked my subscribers, how do we as a country make up for something like that? The murders of the democratically elected presidents of Burundi and Rwanda during the Clinton administration, with regime change as its objective, unleashed what the world now knows as the Rwanda genocide, and exposes the lie to those willing to do the research that Africans just like killing each other. The arsonists have succeeded in keeping Africa on fire. John Perkins, in his many interviews after publication of his book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, exposes the targeted assassinations carried out by the U.S. of Omar Torrijos of Panama and Jaime Roldos of Ecuador, because they dared to care more about the people of their own countries and less about the interests of the cartel of bankers that wanted to indebt them and U.S. corporations that wanted to rape them. Declassified documents from U.S. Operation Condor show the establishment of kill teams whose function was to go around the world wherever needed to kill public officials who, like us, only wanted justice and peace. The Frank Church Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Activities specifically found that policies and behaviors that were honed overseas were brought back home and used against U.S. citizens. That was the point of COINTELPRO. The U.S. government's organized and total effort to wipe out dissent at home for its policies abroad. The purpose of the Church Committee was to examine U.S. intelligence policies and found that they included targeted assassination, illegal employment by the CIA of university professors, members of the clergy, journalists, publishing houses, media outlets. The Church Committee found that anti-war activists were subjected to illegal break-ins into their homes, illegal wiretaps, blacklisting so they could not earn a living, and a broad range of activities to smear them in the press so that whatever happened to them would appear as if they deserved what they got. When the FBI's COINTELPRO program used the word neutralize in reference to black groups, it meant bad jacketing that sent innocent people to prison, like recently passed Geronimo Pratt, later known as Geronimo Gijaga, and even targeted assassination like Malcolm X and Dr. King. For the Puerto Rican independence movement, Filiberto Ojeda Rios was neutralized when he bled to death at his home after the FBI surrounded his home and shot through his front door, wounding him, and then prevented an ambulance from coming to save him. Anna Mae Pictou Akwash was neutralized when she was bad jacketed and then murdered and dismembered, with the autopsy being performed by a company coroner, thereby preventing her immediate identification. Anna Mae was a budding leader in the American Indian movement who was neutralized as a result of affirmative U.S. government policy to do so. Now, what I want to leave you with is this. If these arsonists would light a fire in Africa, Asia, Latin America, even Eurasia, if they have to preserve their freedoms over us, why wouldn't they light a fire right here at home? I hope I've demonstrated that they will do just that. My final admonition is this. I have lent extensive study to the assassinations in the U.S. during the decade of the 1960s. These are assassinations that mattered. They changed U.S. policy from a peace and justice orientation to what we have today. I believe that the antecedents to these struggles in which we are engaged today can be found in what happened in the U.S. in the 1960s, when we, the people who struggled for peace, were on the verge of winning. The torch of leadership in the U.S. was about to be passed to a new generation that thought differently. President John Kennedy said the word peace over 30 times in his graduation address to American University, just weeks before he was killed. In one of my congressional conferences on COINTELPRO, we learned from one researcher that Bobby Kennedy had shortlisted Martin Luther King Jr. as a vice presidential possibility. And so instead of the torch being passed to a new generation that was willing to struggle with the meaning of U.S. patriotism in a multipolar world, and what we ask our soldiers to do for us, and what we expect our police to do to us, and what we do for them in return, every one of you in this room knows what we have instead. At this conference, you have covered important issues like conscientious objection. My son is a conscientious objector. Ways to heal PTSD, serving homeless veterans, the legacy of Agent Orange, the battle for justice in Palestine, and new forms of resistance. I've been underneath U.S. bombs in Libya. I've tasted the grit and had to flush it from my eyes. I've been in prison in Israel, but nothing I have done for peace can ever give me an experience like what you all have had. I have long said, let's end U.S. wars and create not one more generation of veterans who will in the future be neglected by their own government. I salute you for leading peace, and I hope that this convention has been all that its planners and attendees hoped it would be. And in conclusion, I say, make my funk a peace funk.
That was a great comment, great speech. A lot for people to think about.